be able to approach that person where they're at, develop ally relationships. I can remember, I believe it was Malcolm who said the ballot or the bullet. Well, we know that the bullet is not going to work. And so the ballot is a place that we have to be right now, moving together as a collective, understanding policy and decisions that affect us directly, and then to move toward those people who are going to be able to answer our need. And so in today's culture, a collective voice is necessary, and a voice that is unmuted is a voice that is necessary in order for us to gain the kind of attention that we need.
I would add to that, when we're talking about the systemic barriers and the fact that we interact with systemic barriers every single day, we all really have the opportunity and the experience of being both a silencer and being silenced. And it will take focused reflection and a commitment to action, as you're talking about, to be able to really change that and change that interaction. One analogy when I thought about this is that when you talk about the institutional racism and the way that many of our institutions were even developed, right, we still see the constant disparity and inequity, and it's become palatable or accepted, or at least we haven't been held accountable to do much about it. Right. And so with all of that, we operate and we live with power differentials every day. And so it's the power differentials that I think underlie a lot of the systemic barriers that we face and how we begin to operate in places where we're silencing others or we're feeling silenced. For those who feel silenced, when I think about it and think about the history, I think there's always there a fear of retaliation, which is very real from many of the experiences that we have been exposed to historically and in our own lives. I think there's the lived experience that individuals have. And again, operating day to day in power differentials. We move in and out of them, but day to day. And so day to day in a power differential, there can be experiences where what you say is dismissed, whatever you say doesn't seem credible, and that you're even just shut down from even feeling like anything that you say will actually matter. And so you actually lose your motivation to speak up and to move and operate. And sometimes you just take that on and have it consistently across settings instead of identifying in different settings when I should really speak up now, and asking yourself, is the risk that is a trauma that is experienced collectively, is that risk really in this moment, or does it just feel like that for me? And so you have to go into reflection, I think, to be able to move past being silenced and accepting that. And to your point you made earlier is that we're so exposed sometimes that there is an acceptance of various kinds of oppression, things that we see in other people's experiences that we don't speak up on that we could, and things that we experience ourselves. Since you were giving the quotes and people, I was thinking of Harriet Tubman's quote, where she said that she would have helped to free more slaves had they known they were slaves. But there's such a matter of acceptance that, being treated in and living in disparity can feel comfortable and okay, and you stop talking or trying to do anything about it. And so I think that I think we have to understand that, and a lot of us can relate to that from moments of being silenced. But I think that we can also relate to moments where we engaged in being the silencer, and we have to ask ourselves that when we had more of an influence or more of power, how did we use that power? How did we use that privilege? Did your actions, did the things I say today do anything to oppress another's voice? Do I find that in the way that I respond to situations, am I defending my privilege in any way? Am I trying to guard my comfort more than I am really addressing what I see as far as the needs of others? And am I willing to take risk and advocate in times when it's necessary? So I think sitting with those questions and thinking of it from both regards, and I think then not only sitting with, but saying, okay, if I don't need to be silenced in a moment that matters, how can I take that next step? Let me try again, right? And if I am silencing someone, how can I take that next step to not dismiss and to not, for example, restate their narrative for them in a way that's not really what they said, engage in that full active listening. And so I guess I'm going too long, but I'll keeping the conversation going with an openness to self-reflection.
Next question is going to be for Raheem and Shamir. What actionable steps can individuals, communities, and organizations take to ensure the unmuting of voices is not just a moment, but a sustained and impactful movement for positive change?
Well, I'll go ahead and kick it off. Anytime you sit in a panel discussion, you kind of think you know what you're going to say. But I want to thank Dr. Crawley and Dr. Yarborough because you gave a sense of realness to these questions. You gave some life to these questions. And I'm really happy to be here today because I think that question that you posed to me, Rolanda, has three significant components. You talked about individuals, communities, and organizations to ensure that the unmuting of voices is something that's sustainable. I would take this through one lens, one dimension as a D&I officer here at the NJDOL. I think about this organization. How can we ensure that these voices that are unmuted remain sustained? And I think that starts with everyone in the audience out here and getting a temperature check of where you're at in your day-to-day experience here at labor, right? So I'll start with the organizations. I think organizations have a commitment to employees the same way employees have a commitment to organizations. Accountability comes into that framework as well. So accountability just doesn't work from the bottom up, it works from the top down as well. And so I think if you want to look at something that's sustainable for unmuting voices, it starts out with something like we had 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, our diversity climate survey. Because in that gave a temperature check, that gave a gauge of what each and every one of you are sitting in these seats are feeling. We're able to take that information, synthesize it, and then look at it through a quantitative measure to say, how can we be a better version of ourselves? And when you talk about the word sustainable, what comes to my mind is the idea of measurable. So if we're going to sustain it and say, okay, as we're going to sustain this, what are we doing year over year? That's a key component to that. So I would just like to start with the idea around an organization and the commitment that they have to ensure that people do feel included, that they don't feel like they can't speak out in fear of retaliation. And I think it's also this idea that, when you start to look at retention rates within your organization, it starts with really your climate. Why are people leaving, right? And you think about how retaliation really, there's a myriad of things where people interpret retaliation. So if I'm leaving an organization and you give me an exit survey, am I going to be truthful and honest? Right? Because then if you're able to identify me, maybe I'm worrying about you trying to impact me as I move on throughout my career. So I think it really starts with us trying to dismantle some of these behaviors that we may see within our own organization and really starting to educate our staff around the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think it really starts there from an organizational level.
So since he tapped into, since he tapped into the organizational aspect of it, I'll talk about it from a individual standpoint. And one of the things that he talked about was to sustainability. And I think one of the key things, even as an organization and as an individual, is to check the temperature, because you want to make sure that what you're trying to sustain is something that you want long-term. As it relates to organizations, one of the things that I have tried to implement is to make sure that I create a safe space as an individual working with organizations, and that they feel that they're able to voice their opinions, voice their concerns. And although my organization isn't as large as, the OL, I realized that even creating those small subsections or small groups within individuals, they're more open to expressing themselves and really listening to hear and not listening to respond. That's one of the key things that I realize as an individual that I have learned makes a greater impact, even in organizations. But as I said, individually, it makes a big difference. And so I think how we respond is is important, but I also feel the way that we listen also makes a key difference in how we sustain these types of unmuted voices within our organizations and individually as well.
For Andrea and AC Yarborough, how can leadership create a space where muted voices are heard and considered in the decision-making process?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for the space and the opportunity to be a part of this program today. I'm really excited about it. People are willing to commit themselves, and they, when we deeply listen to them, they want to be a part of, they want to be included, they want to share their ideas, their thoughts, opinions. I think that leadership, we as leaders, we determine the climate, the culture of the organization and the climate of the division. So within the organization, we have the culture, but we as managers and supervisors, we have an opportunity to create the climate within our divisions. So regardless of what we believe is happening, within the organization itself, it's an opportunity for us as supervisors to set the tone as to what we want and what we will accept within our division. We need to create a team, with a range of diverse backgrounds, whether it's introverts, extroverts, experience, perspectives, cultural, racial, educational, or professional. The team has to be diverse. When we say diverse, we think of Black, white, male, female, but there's so many aspects of diversity, and we have to think about all those things. There are voices that are muted because they're introverts. So we have to find ways to include those voices as well. We have to, I think this has been mentioned, power differentials. Dr. Yarborough talked about that, right? We have to identify what is my power differential from my team and how do I make them feel comfortable? I think Shamir said a safe environment. Not just a space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but a space of belonging. Leaders have to have, or must, make their team feel like they have a safe space where they belong, where we can share opinions, and it's a space of opportunity and not a space of contention. Because opinions, we have the right to say, hey, I think this might work better. And leaders should be able to receive that. Someone talked about, active listening. It is critical. It is vital when someone is speaking. Just listen. Don't be disruptive, because they have something to say, and each one of us have a voice that we want to be heard. I know that as a woman and a woman of color, my voice has been muted many times, whether it's because of fear of retaliation has been set up here before, whether it's muted because I was dismissed. Because it's not just the fact that I didn't speak up or I didn't have anything to say, but dismissing someone is muting their voices as well. And that, for me, is when you're in a room and you're speaking, but it's almost as if you're invisible. I feel that that is the worst thing anyone can do, and that is the worst muting of anyone's voice. Do not give someone a seat at the table, but not give them an opportunity to be heard. So leaders, just, I would just recommend that you just be mindful and create an environment where you foster an environment where your team feels safe to share ideas. They feel safe to share their opinions and their thoughts, because people genuinely want to be a part of, and they genuinely want to give, and they genuinely want to be successful. And I think if we do that, it's not about just our team succeeding, it's about success of the entire organization. It's success of whatever you're in. And I think that, and that's why I felt like this conversation was warranted, and I felt that this conversation was going to be extremely meaningful. And I know that it's meaningful to me. I've already gained some things from here that is going to help me to figure out, how I continue to move beyond systemic boundaries, how I continue to empower anyone that I come across to move beyond systemic boundaries. And I kind of, challenge every single person in here who lead in any capacity, whether it's a parent. Do not stifle your children's voices, because that's teaching them how to become muted when they need to have a voice and be heard. Thank you.
So much. No, that was wonderful. So I think piggybacking on some of what she said, when I think about the place of a leader and the what it takes to be able to be in a leadership role, but then to still be open to the voices of others, the ideas of others, and incorporate it genuinely in how you're making decisions and how you're planning. It reminds me of work that comes out of a focus on humility in leadership. And that's something, there are a lot of resources out there that's something that you should look into as a leader. I'd recommend that every leader do, because again, I know I talked about self-reflection earlier, but standing in a place of humility says that I understand that as a leader, I'm not your fixer necessarily, I'm not your savior necessarily, but I'm here to be able to provide supports and to be able to empower you, and that's what you're there to do, not to dictate, not to knock people down, but to lift everyone up. Everyone should be stronger after working with you and in and under your leadership. And I don't think you can do that without humility and focusing on that, and a constant focus on humanity for everyone. Because when you're focused on humanity for everyone, it leaves you in a place where it's much more, it's not palatable for you to be as dismissive, right? Because you're listening to everyone from that lens. And that's something that I think is important in our direct leadership, and even all of us participate in services that we're all together collectively offering to the public. And we need to practice that humility and that humanity in how we do all of our work on a day-to-day basis. From the leadership perspective and in preparing leaders, that's kind of where I'm thinking about this from. We have to understand that within organizations, we can develop a climate and a culture, which is critical and very important. The way that we have the signs that communication works on, it gives a signal to everyone that this is a priority, diversity is a priority here in this agency. But it's that interaction between an individual and usually their direct supervisor or their leadership, which really dictates how they operate each day, how they live each day, their outcomes, how they perform. And so we can't just assume that every person in a leadership or supervisory role is prepared to lead in that way to empower other people. And so we have to be purposeful in our supports in developing our leadership and our supervisors to be able to create environments where people don't feel silenced. And then sometimes you have to go the extra mile. You talked about introverts. I've had team members of introverts, and some of the strategies I've used with them is to say, I want you to know that when we're in that room, I do see you. You don't disappear, you don't shrink, you're not invisible. I see you, and you're on my team because you're a valued part of this team. And so I need in the next meeting or sometime, you're gonna have to say one thing. Start there and come out, and because you're valued. When we talk one-on-one, I hear your voice, I look at your work, right? You're here for a reason. And so I try to challenge anyone who's trying to be too comfortable in that, and I take that as just a direct effort. I've had to do that on different times, and that's what I think a valuable part of my work, and I've appreciated the opportunities. And then I think the last thing that I just want to say is just making sure that we're constantly welcoming a diversity of thought. Mm-hmm. It's so easy when we're establishing norms and how we operate. It's easier to kind of operate in things that either you already know or that we've been doing for a long time, even when you know it's not really working. Right? But sometimes to make that change and that shift, it's not working because you've heard bits and pieces, but you might have to open it up to really get that full feedback and get that diversity of thought so that whatever you do next can really be inclusive and holistic.
I appreciate everything, in terms of the internal leadership that's here in the department, in the community, wherever you're at. I'm of the presence of mind when we think communally that there is a leadership void. When When I was coming through, MLK was still alive. When I was coming through, Fannie Lou Hamer was still alive. Malcolm was still alive. And having those voices out there already gave me the opportunity to not only hear, but to not necessarily emulate, but to know that there have been the unmuting of voices for a very long time in our community. We can go back to Frederick Douglass in the 1800s. He unmuted millions of voices. We can talk about, as I said, Martin Luther King and the things that he did. And we think about the fact that whatever the number of enslaved people came here in the 1600s or whatever it was, now to be 30 million, somewhere around there, there's been some unmuting going on. And there have been some men and women that have done that. When I was growing up, Shirley Chisholm was still alive. And I can think of a host of other people that were there that gave voice, that we listened to. And I say all that to say this. I asked my pastor, who is my spiritual father, I said, who are our leaders today? I'm talking communally. And he says to me that they're in the vineyard, meaning hopefully they're being prepared. Because when I take a look around the landscape now, I'm not so sure about the relevancy of an Al Sharpton right now. Jesse is quiet right now. And as I look over the terrain, I don't see anybody that's really doing the work. Not that work isn't being done. I like Hakeem Jeffries. He's a sharp brother. But as a collective, even if you ask yourself right now, who is it that you are following, maybe besides your pastor in your church? Who are you looking to right now internationally, globally, to unmute your voice? I'm not sure right now if that person exists. And eerily, I think about, this may be way off the cuff, there was a time when a man, well, a position named Pharaoh, said that he wanted to kill all the firstborn. And so when I think about the brutality, when I think about what's happening in terms of young black males being killed, I wonder if they're searching right now for that next leader. And so we have to be cognizant of the fact that we as a people, collectively, and as Brother Raheem told me about 2 weeks ago, we got to learn how to run in the same direction. And we don't do that very well right now.
Dr. Crawley made an excellent point. And as you know, I dialogued with him a few weeks ago. Now I want to kind of center this conversation around unmuting the black voices, right? What does that look like? And I think we have to take it from a historical lens of the sacrifices that people have made over the years. He just mentioned a number of people: Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer. The list goes on and on and on and on. John Lewis. You can name a number of people around the civil rights movement, and even before then. But I think the one thing about when you think about unmuting your voice and what strength it takes to do so, I think when you look at those historical figures and look at the obstacles that they faced during those times, at least from a policy perspective, we are not hindered with those same formal policies and violations of our civil rights that were in place then. So I think now we think about going forward, look at the challenges that they face. We don't face those same challenges. So get strength from that. Take that as something that kind of gets you across the finish line and say, if you're able to, and I know everyone's not here, Dr. Crawley, and we talked a little bit about this, to say if they were able to lay down their life, what does it look like if I had to lay down mine? So I just wanted to just say that.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. I do agree that the support and the humility and, our ancestors and providing, strength and insight in their words and wisdom actually goes a long way in helping the people today mute our voices. So I appreciate all of that. Our next question is for all of the panelists. When you see others attempting to mute an individual's voice, what steps do you or have you taken to support the individual facing this challenge? I guess we could start with Dr. Crawley.
Well, one of the things that I believe that has to happen, you have to be an ally to people. Becoming an ally means a lot of different things, but it's already been said, when you see something and you realize something, and to be able to do something about that is a pivotal step in supporting. And we need to, again, inform people that not to say something is a form of complicity, meaning, a silent agreement, a silent acquiescence to what's going on. And so I can remember years ago, because I'm about 80 years old, I can remember years ago that people used to say, just us, justice. But we would break it down in the community and say, you really mean just us, meaning you, I'm sorry to say, as white folk. And then when you would break down the word history, you mean his story, okay? Meaning that his story is defining who we are. So even in the midst of watching someone being muted, it is incumbent upon us to take a stand right then and there to be able to support that person, whatever it is, to be able to speak out and to do what they need to do. I can remember a young man by the name of Bob Marley back in the 60s, 70s. He had an album called One Love or something like that. And in one of the songs it says, stand up and speak up for your rights.
Well, I gave an example earlier of empowerment for those who I see who I see are being silenced. But then the other piece is, whenever I have the opportunity to, I just have to go ahead and interject in the conversation and say, okay, now let's go back to what that person was saying, because I'd like to hear it, and to model that so that everyone knows that if I'm in the room and I am silent about them being silent, then I'm not offering, then I'm really promoting it and encouraging it. So, so I find that I want to say something about it, stop it, and create an opportunity. And then if I see that there seems to be a pattern where someone is, or I hear that someone is constantly in the space of silencing, especially in a leadership role, in a way that's destructive and in a way that inhibits others, then it's time to have a conversation. And a lot of the tools and things that I talked about earlier, it's time to start some conversation, encouragement, coaching, accountability around making sure that that's not continuing, and setting an expectation that it's unacceptable.
I would say, in my lived experience, when I have witnessed an individual's voice being muted by another, what steps do I take? I typically go to the individual and let them know people only do to you what you allow. And if we just sit with that for a minute and think about that, people don't dictate our circumstances, we dictate our own. And I think the take-home message from that is, and Dr. Yarbrough, thank you for bringing this up, the power dynamics are so critical, because that plays a pivotal role, and that's what instills fear into people. And my grandmother told me a long time ago, fear is nothing but false expectations appearing real, right? False evidence appearing real. And she said, Brahim, I want you to be fearless as a young man growing up. So I don't move out of the fear continuum. I move out of a fearless continuum. And I think that looks like, for me, or what it has looked like for me, is to talk to individuals and say, get in a position where you might be working 9 to 5. If this isn't working for you, work on your 5 to 9. Grow yourself, right? So you can outgrow the position. You can outgrow the job. You can outgrow this circumstance. So I think a key component is, just supporting individuals and giving them the tips and the tricks that they need to feel valued. Because when that's happening to you, it's happened to me in the previous job. You feel downtrodden. You feel as though you're stuck. And the only way a truck gets stuck in the mud is if the weight on the truck is weighing the truck down a lot of times. You know what? Get rid of that weight and start your truck up and move on. Thank you.
Maya Angelou said, there is no greater agony than bearing untold story inside of you. And when I think about that quote, it would be detrimental to me, not to, if I'm sharing a space where someone is being muted and I don't, in some way or in some capacity, try to find a way to empower that person or to bring it to the person's attention who's doing the muting to recognize what exactly they're doing. Because, sometimes they don't really recognize that this is what's happening. And sometimes people have to feel uncomfortable in some situations in order for others to be comfortable. And we talked about the power dynamics, and that's part of the problem. I do have my staff, and I try to lead by example. I try my best to, I'm sure I've fallen short. I will do a survey later to find out how I'm doing. But I try to empower them to have a voice about any and everything. I don't want to lose any of my team, but when I see that they're working hard and they're not progressing, they're not moving, and they come to me, my goal as a supervisor is to make sure that I empower them to even excel me. So I have some who are just very shy, very quiet, or they're not confident enough to speak about what they really want. So as Brahim says, I go to them and I mentor. I think that's part of my responsibility as a supervisor, is to mentor my team so that their voices are not muted because of fear of retaliation or because they've just never done it and they don't know how to do it. Because whatever the reason we lack confidence, I'll share a quick story. What happened to me when I was 14 years old. I was in a courtroom. I was on an American history class trip. The judge in the courtroom, he was talking, and I guess we weren't supposed to ask questions. I'm inquisitive. I asked a question. He said to me, I expect to see you standing before me in a couple of years. I was 14 years old at the time. That was a traumatic experience. I literally froze. I said nothing. I felt paralyzed. I will never forget that moment. I never want anyone to feel that moment. I was literally paralyzed. But I know whom I belong to, and I know who my parents are, and I knew that what they had for me and what they had instilled in me, I don't know where I got the courage or the power, but it was my spiritual father, as he said, and my biological father and mother, who, before I left that day, before I walked out of his courtroom when he was done, because he was under the impression, this is the time for learning, shut your mouth, something to that. I said, the only way you will ever see me in your courtroom is if I'm standing before you defending someone who is falsely accused. I don't know how, and I will never forget it. And when I went back to school, my teacher said to me, Miss Atkinson, that's my maiden name. So he's like, I am so proud of you. And I was like, but to this day, it still bothers me. It still bothers me because someone took something from me that they didn't give to me. And so therefore, it is my responsibility not to ever do that or not to ever see that happen to someone without having an impact or trying to have an impact. Thank you.
I think for me, a tip to help either individuals or organizations is really, I learned this lesson from my kids. So I have two daughters. One is a preteen, so if any of you guys have parents, please pray for me. I had to yell upstairs and say, clean your room. And I walked upstairs and it wasn't clean. And so I'm looking around, I'm like, did you not hear what I just said? And I had, in an instant, I realized I wasn't upset because they didn't hear me. I was upset because they didn't respond to the actions that I gave them. There was no action behind what they heard. And I think about that in the terms of, silenced voices. A lot of times, people don't speak up because they're fearful that there won't be any progression to the ideas and the concepts that they bring to the team. And so they say, I won't say anything because nothing's never going to change. Or I won't speak up because it's not going to change my situation. And as it relates to the analogy I just gave, just because I said I want the room clean and it wasn't clean is not going to stop me from telling them that they need their room clean. And I don't want them to be comfortable being uncomfortable in this room, this uncomfortable room. And so for me, I think the key to helping other people unsilence their voices is really to be an advocate and a public advocate, because that's what advocacy means, and really recommending that people, as a leader, people on your team, you can assess their strengths and bring out those strengths, and when you do that, create an environment where those strengths can flourish. So I think that's probably my number one tip with helping people to unsilence their voices, and creating that atmosphere where they're not comfortable being uncomfortable and that they can flourish in those spaces.
That, and I know we're running short on time, but I have to ask one more question. I can't help it. And this question is also for all of the panelists. I just want to know, with the unmuted our voices, what inspired you to be on this panel discussion?
Well, first of all, I was very gracious, number one, in terms of being asked to participate first and foremost. And I've said it maybe earlier, wanting to, add value to what was going on. And when I think about this in depth, I think about my mother. My mother was a community action program director in the late 60s or 70s. And she talked about everything. And she worked among men, and she held her own. I watched her hold her own. And she gave me my first little speech in high school, running for student council, which I had no business doing. But anyway, I was running. And she gave me the first line or so of my speech. It was something like, one of the last parts of it was, not to have anything materialize from my promises. And I've always been stuck on that. What is going to materialize from what you do? And so being on this panel today gave me an opportunity to reflect on me and to hear all these things that the panelists have said. I knew that I would get some growth out of it just being here. And so my greatest thought is that we would continue, that we start something and continue, and that we would be an asset to everyone in the department.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here and to have been asked to participate in the panel. In my everyday work, I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Employment Accessibility Services, and I've spent a lot of my career working in advocacy, specifically for people with disabilities. And in that area, there's a slogan that's often used and talked about, and it comes from others that you've heard before, but it's nothing about us without us. And so within this advocacy community, you always hear the conversations around, we don't need you to save us. What we need is your support. What we need is for you not to push us into segregated work environments. What we need for you to do is not make decisions on our behalf that limit our opportunities. And so I'm constantly thinking about that. So when we talk about unmuted voices and the participation in this panel, the call for that kind of support and that need is parallel for the Black community. And I personally live that as an African-American female every day. And so having opportunities to be with my own lived experience, my experiences of being muted, and being able to be involved heavily in advocacy for people with disabilities and being muted, I deeply value diversity in thought. And I really try every day to make sure that my interactions demonstrate that I acknowledge and actively listen to everyone. And so I just want to continue to carry this and learn from this experience to be able to carry it in my everyday work. And so I'm happy to be part of this conversation. I like the intentionality behind it. And it made me think about the fact that I am really pro-voice and pro-inclusion. And so I'm happy to be here and participate in that.
I guess why I'm happy to be on a panel, or that's why I volunteered for the panel. I'm laughing because I'm always asked to be a moderator, so that's part of it. But knowing the topic of discussion, to echo Dr. Crawley's sentiments, the main kind of impetus for me to join this panel was to learn. I figured this is just a very powerful topic, and having a diverse array of panelists with different lived experiences, speaking to, unmuting the silent voices of today. Number one, it can help me learn and grow. Number two, those things that I've learned and kind of digest and synthesize, I hopefully can bring back to labor. We can utilize that here within our workspace. And I think number three, being a Morehouse College graduate, and this is Black History Month, I would like to say that I was never taught to mute my voice, whether that was at home or in my college environment. When there was activism going on at Morehouse, I walked out of class and I marched with everyone else right down near front of King Chapel, because those were things that we believed in. I think at the time we were talking about divesting Coca-Cola in 1992 from Morehouse. And I walked right out of class and I told my mom, look, I don't know what's going to happen. But she said, you know what? I taught you that because I sat down in Greensboro with them sit-ins in the 60s. So I just want to say that, given this opportunity, I just wanted to share. And hopefully, anytime I participate in something, it's always about what's the value for the people attending today. You all could have been to lunch today. You decided to come here. So hopefully you all receive something that you can take back and really get some value out of it. And I hope this is an ongoing discussion because I found it very beneficial. So thank you.
So I'm very thankful that I was asked to be a part of this panel today. I was nervous. I was a bit apprehensive. I was like, I don't know. Brian was like, yes, you can. Just do it. But for me, as someone whose voice has been muted, be it that, I was told to be quiet, be it by in the workspace, or I was told grown-ups are talking, leave the room. Don't ask that, don't ask this, because you're a child, stay in a child's place. So, I come from a culture, I'm Jamaican, where you're, as children, your inquisitiveness can be stifled just a bit. And therefore, it took time for me to understand what was permissible and what was acceptable as a child to ask. But my children's great-grandmother taught me a lesson because I tried to do that to my son when he was 2, and she said, don't do that. And she was probably almost 80 years old. You're stifling his inquisitiveness. And let me tell you, that boy's been talking since he was 1. He's 29. He has not stopped. And I've engaged them. They have a question. If I didn't know the answer, I said, hold up, I'll find the answer for you. We'll get back to it. Remind mommy. So I was empowered because of that, and not only because I was muted in that sense, but the fact that I was sitting in the room, had something to say, but I was invisible. And I felt that invisibility. And for me, that's tough. And so it's been a journey of self-discovery and empowerment for me. So that's another reason why I was grateful to sit on this panel, because I've learned so much today. I've gained so much. Being empowered to find your voice in spite of, systemic challenges, it takes strength and it takes courage. And so I hope that what I've said or what any of us have said today give each and every one of you that are listening to us courage. Whatever your situation is, be it, racial, cultural, introvert, extrovert, woman, as we know, that's part of the reason why my voice, to be honest, has been muted and silenced many times at tables that people felt I didn't belong to because I'm a woman. So I just thank you for the space, to the chairs of this committee, and for the opportunity to just share. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so thankful to be invited to speak on the panel and also just to take up space with the rest of the panelists. Thank you so much for inviting me. As you guys, if you haven't read the bios and everything in our little pamphlets, I have a very diverse background, and I took a really untraditional or unconventional route to my advocacy, and that was pageantry. And so in that realm, a lot of times, when you look at me, you don't typically see what they would refer to as a pageant queen or a pageant title holder. And for me, diversity and inclusion is so important because I always wanted to be the face of the generation to say, if she can do it, I can do it too, but also to show other young women what the possibilities are and that you can be more than just a pretty face. You can advocate for the things that drive you, that inspire you, the things that you want to impact. And I think that this panel was very important because not only did it help me to assess how voices are unmuted, but it also helped me to assess how maybe many times I have been in a position to mute voices, either from my own ego, from me being dismissive, not being open as or receptive as I should have been in a lot of those spaces because I know what that feels like. And so I think that this panel did a really good job today of helping me to also check myself. And I'm hoping that the panel was able to do that for you as well. But again, I'm really just thankful to be here, and I think that moving or coming away from this panel is really just to be more self-aware of what we do and what we say in our leadership roles and how we can progressively help to change and to eventually unmute those voices permanently. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all of that. I appreciate it. And I just want to say that today it was definitely impactful, but I want us to keep two things in the forefront of our minds. You know, each one teach one. That's not just at work. It's in our everyday lives, right? And I also want us to walk in stride and to be the change that we need. You know, we don't want to wait for the next one. It could be you. You know, if you see something, say something, you know. So I just want to say thank you for your time. And we just want to ask if anyone in the audience has any question. Well, a question, because we running tight on time. We running tight on time. Okay. Okay, yeah, right. So, well, if you have any questions, you know, you can follow up after the discussion. And we just appreciate everyone for attending and people viewing in on our YouTube channel. And thank you. And everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.